Hi everyone, I'm CKRC. Let's build an OMPHOBBY M7 together. For bag one, we can go over what's included. You have your main head components, so the head block, your blade grips, you have the blade grip arms. In this case, these are the 32mm arms. These are actually one of two options you have. You can also choose the 37mm arms that are included with your kit in a different bag. You have your 4 bearings, your thrust bearings, your O-rings, and your palm dampers, depending on which you want to run. I will be running palm dampers, but the manual will show you how to install the corresponding O-rings if you want to run O-rings. You also have the hardware as well. We also have shims included as well for if you end up having to shim anything for your head. To start off with, I'm going to go ahead and stick my feathering shaft through the spindle shaft pivot. It's a little bit of a tight fit, but once you get it through, you can see that you can actually move around the spindle shaft pivot that's inside of there. Once you have your spindle installed through your spindle shaft pivot like this, you'll want to go ahead and grab the M4x8 button head screws, put your spacers on them, and then thread them into your spindle shaft pivot. I'll be using blue Loctite for this. Once you have the M4x8 button head screws installed with the spacers into your spindle shaft pivot, we can go ahead and put that off to the side, and we'll go and start working on the assembling the blade grips. These are actually going to be the same on both sides, but we'll want to go ahead and assemble it. We'll do one at a time, and then you do the same thing for the other one. So you'll take 2 bearings here. They're going to be identical in the bag, and they actually sandwich the entire assembly in together. I like to use a little bit of Loctite 638. I find that over time, if you don't use a green Loctite or green retaining compound, the radial bearings can actually loosen up over time, causing the blade grip to get loose, and that is not fun. So for my builds, I always am using a little bit of green Loctite. You can kind of test fit it as well, so if you go ahead and put that into there, you'll see that it's in there. Now, of course, when you tighten the bolts that hold your spindle shaft together, it will compress this together. However, for the purposes of my build, I want to make it so that my blade grip arms are going to try to last as long as possible. So, using a little bit of the 638, I go ahead and just line the outside. Now, I've already cleaned off the outer surfaces of my bearings and the inside of my blade grip arm, or my blade grip, with alcohol. Go ahead and make sure we have enough that goes all around. And then flip this, place it there. And as we put that in there, we can see that it kind of squeezes out a little bit. Use a towel or a shop towel or something to clean up the outside, and that's good. So once we get our bearing set into here with some green Loctite, it'll still be loose, so you want to make sure you don't flip this over or do anything extreme with it, because it needs to set. We can go ahead and take a look. If you notice, if you take your spindle, for each thrust bearing, you'll have 2 of these end pieces for it, and they're actually differently sized. So this one is going to be tight, whereas this is quite loose. The loose one will actually need to go on the inside of your blade grip, and I can show you. If you look, you have this ridge here. That ridge is actually going to be, or the valley or groove is going to be where the balls for your thrust bearing are going to be riding. So in this case, our correct order of the stack is going to be, with this being loose, it needs to go on the inside here, and then we'll have our thrust bearing, which is, we want to make sure that the open side of the cage faces outwards, and then your inside, or the tighter of the 2 thrust bearing ends, then a spacer. Then we'll have our final radial bearing right here, which goes on the edge. And so if you see, this is the one with the bigger inner diameter, and this is the one with the smaller inner diameter. You'll want to make sure that you lubricate your thrust bearing as well before assembling this. I'm going to go ahead and use some of a bearing grease, but you really want to make sure that you lubricate this entire assembly. It is important to note that we do have oil or axle bearing access for the thrust bearing here, so you can actually add lubricant or grease to this as you need to, but for now we're going to go ahead and just make sure that we grease it up amply and then put it in. Okay, so here's my greased up thrust bearing. I actually have the tight part of the thrust bearing on the right side and the loose side on the left. You can see that the cage is actually facing where the open side is facing to the right, which is towards the tight side. Now, this entire assembly can be put through the blade grip. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and feed this in nice and slowly. So once you've fed that into there, you can actually take your spacer here, go ahead and put that in. And that spacer is here to keep the radial bearing right here from contacting the outside of that thrust bearing. You'll also see that once you do that, you can actually kind of see the thrust bearing through the access hole. And I will put a little bit of green Loctite on the outside of this bearing. Make sure you don't get any on the inside, otherwise you'll never get it out. And then using the spindle, actually as a guide, we'll go ahead and push our spindle out to make sure that we can get that onto there nice. And then run it down, and that is it. And then now we can go ahead and install the little button head screws that we have right here. There's a small little washer, or a spacer in this case, and you'll use a little 2mm driver. Go ahead and put that there. Pull this out. I put a tiny bit of blue Loctite onto there. Snug. So to summarize, we've installed the two bearings. I used green Loctite 638 for them, and then we have our thrust bearing stack over here, and then we have our installed bearing access or grease access screw in place. And that concludes how to build your first blade grip arm from the bearing perspective. The next thing we can do is actually install the blade grip arms, which are pretty easy as well. So we'll go ahead and just see that that fits onto there like that. And then you'll use the two socket head cap screws right here, and these are actually held on, or you use a 2.5mm driver for those. And then once we get those installed, then we can install the little ball. Put a bit of Loctite on there. Go ahead and thread it into the hole. And we go ahead and just do the same thing for the other side. So for actually assembling the head, you're going to need two 5mm wrenches. I have two of them here. You're going to need your spindle, your assembled blade grips, and depending on whether you're going to run O-rings or the palm dampers, you're going to need the corresponding dampers that you want to use. In my case, I'm going to be running the palm dampers, but I can sort of show the requirements for both. So regardless of whether you're going to be running O-rings or the palm dampers, you are going to need the O-rings. So in my case, because I'm using palm dampers, you can see that there is a nice slot here where an O-ring will actually fit in quite nicely. The spacers that are included as well are different. It's really important to go ahead and make sure you're using the right spacers. So there is a spacer like this where you can see the step, and the step actually kind of mirrors what the palm damper looks like. Those are used for the O-rings, so you don't want to use those for your head if you're going to be using palm dampers. Now, in my case, because I'm using palm dampers, I can go ahead and find the O-ring or the spacer, and that has a flat side here, so you can see that's completely flat. That's going to go on the inside of my head block, and actually that's going to be the same for both, whether you use O-rings or the palm damper. So in my case, I'll go ahead and put that into the head, and then take an O-ring. Now I like to lubricate my head, or my O-rings for my head, so I'm going to go ahead and add some lubricant to that, and we'll go ahead and make sure we get an ample amount of it. Now, it is really, really important to note that you have to be careful when you're doing this, because when you put the spindle shaft through the head, it can collect some of this grease. Now, I'm going to show you how I prevent that when I thread it through, but you just want to be mindful of that because you don't want any grease on the inside of your spindle, because otherwise the Loctite may not work as it's supposed to. Now, once I've gone ahead and lubricated that O-ring, I'm going to go ahead and fit it into here. And we're going to take my palm damper. I put a little bit of grease on there. This side, which is going to have the profile in here for matching into the O-ring, is actually going to be there. You're going to want to go ahead and slip that there and go ahead and squeeze that in like that. And so once that's into there, then we can see that our palm damper is there. We had our flat side of the spacer with the profile here on the inside. We'll go ahead and do that on the same thing over here. So go ahead and drop that into there. You can see that the profile is actually facing towards us because it's going to match or mate with this O-ring. Go ahead and put some grease onto this O-ring as well. Okay, put the flat side down, put our O-ring in there like that. And last thing we'll do is go ahead and put a little bit of grease onto our palm damper as well to make it easier to slide in, and the O-ring. You'll want to go ahead and make sure that this side, which is the side that is going to be against your blade grip radial bearings, is facing outwards. So go ahead and put that into there. You can slide that in. Now we have an assembled head. Notably, because I'm not using the O-rings, the stepped spacers are not going to be used, nor are the rest of my O-rings. Now that we have our completed head components, we've gone ahead and assembled our blade grips as well as our head block with the dampers that you choose. In my case, I'm using palm dampers. It's time to actually thread our spindle through. Now, you don't want to get any grease onto the inside of here, and when you're putting your dampers together, or your dampers into the head block, it is possible that you might have a little bit of grease that it collects. So in my case, what I like to do is I like to go ahead and just thread in a piece of like a shop towel or something along those lines, and that's just to help prevent us from getting any additional grease or any grease into the actual spindle threads, which might reduce the effectiveness of the Loctite. And you can see it that, this will mostly prevent us from having any issues with grease that might collect, or if there is any grease that'll collect at the surface here, we can go ahead and clean that off. And we'll stick this side through the head. Make sure you line up your spacer right here. Now I have my spindle all the way through the head block. We can go ahead and actually pull out the shop towel that we stuffed into there. Now might be a good time as well if you want to go ahead and clean out these threads. I've already gone ahead and done that with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. I'm going to go ahead and clean off the outside of my spindle. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to grab our blade grip arm. We're going to go ahead and put that over one side of the spindle. You'll see how that kind of sticks out there. That's not going to be the final case, however, because we're only assembling one side, that's what it's going to look like for now. Go ahead and I'm going to grab my my bolts right here with my washer. I'm going to put some blue Loctite onto the threads here, and you want to make sure that you get enough blue Loctite onto there so that you don't have these backing out. Go ahead and thread that down. Okay, that's one side. Now I'm going to go ahead and actually push my shaft back through so that that becomes tight. Now you grab your other blade grip, go ahead and do the same thing where we're going to stick that through. It's going to stick right there. Grab our other screw here, or our bolt. Grab our other bolt. Go ahead and put some Loctite. Now, it's really important that you make sure that the notches right here on the top of your blade grips match the notches on your head, and your blade grip arms are correctly oriented. And the reason is because you can actually get this put in incorrectly, and then you're gonna have to redo the spindle, and that's really not fun. So just make sure that it looks like it's supposed to, like this, where the notches are pointing at each other on the head block versus the blade grips, and that your blade grip arms are on the correct side of each other. And then we'll go ahead and grab our Loctite here. Make sure we get ample amounts of Loctite onto there, and then come through here and thread that in. Once this is there, we have to go ahead and torque this down. Now we're talking about a 700 here. So the 700s, they spin, you can run these up to, above 2000 RPM, and there's a lot going on here. So you want to really make sure that you get these torqued down correctly. Okay. All right, so now we have a completed head. We have everything Loctited into place. We have our thrust bearings lubricated and greased up on the inside here. This concludes page 1. Contents of what's in bag 2 for page 2, which are our Swashplate drivers. We've got the Swashplate we got parts for them, the actual washout arms. We have various spacers, the pins, as well as bearings. And so I am still I'm a big fan of using green Loctite. So we're going to go ahead and put a little bit of green Loctite on the outside of these bearings. It's important that you make sure that you put the spacer here between the bearings as you put them into these arms. And so with one bearing already green Loctited into place, I'm going to go ahead and take one of the driver pins here and actually stick it through so that when we drop our spacer down onto here, it's aligned correctly. And then we can take our second bearing. We'll go ahead and put that onto here like that. Take our green Loctite. You see that the spacers lined up in there. We'll do the same thing over here. Okay, so now that we have the arms here assembled with the spacer and the bearings green Loctited into both on both sides, I'm going to go ahead and install these spacers, which have the lip here, into my washout arms. So you can see that I went ahead and inserted the bushings here. The lip on the bushings is actually going to be on the inside of the washout arm. You want to go ahead and do the same thing for the other side. Now that I have my completed assemblies, I'm going to go ahead and actually place this over here. You can can see how that will fit on. Driver pin is actually going to go from the this side, so the side that where the washout link is not facing towards it. Go ahead and stick that through. We can go ahead and see that I assembled my washout arm here. The pin is actually going to go in from the side that is doesn't have the leg of the arm kind of sticking out, and then we'll actually thread in our screw on this side. You'll want to go ahead and make sure you grab the little black spacer, and then this is gonna thread in. Go ahead and put a little bit of and thread that in. Then you'll need to grab the end of the driver pin over here with pliers as you tighten this up. And this should be smooth. You don't really want to feel you don't want to feel any notching in here at all. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing for the other side. So now that we have our two completed washout arms, we can go ahead and actually put them onto the head just for safekeeping for now. It's really important that you don't Loctite these yet, because we're not actually going to tighten them down. We're just basically putting them into place so we don't lose them. So you'll take your washout arm, you'll thread the long screw in, then you'll need to put your spacer on. Now you'll note that these spacers, they're stepped, and so the the big wide side of the spacer needs to face towards the head block like this. And then you'll go ahead and just thread these in, and you can just loosely thread them in for now using a 2.5 millimeter hex driver. Do the same thing for the other side. And that concludes page 1 and page 2. At this point, you should have a head assembled with your blade grips as well as your washout arms. For page 3, we're going to be assembling our Swashplate. This actually comes pre-Loctited from the factory, which is nice, so you shouldn't have to disassemble this. If you want to, you can. Just make sure you use heat, because there's going to be thread lock all up in here, and you might start stripping the screw heads and stuff if you don't use any heat. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it the way it is, because I know that it's been Loctited from the factory. What's included is going to be your ball links, your balls for the Swashplate, and it's going to be important to note that there are two different types of the ball link ends. Now, unfortunately, they are labeled, and I'm going to go ahead and overlay it on the screen for which side is for what. On the actual ball link shafts, it says up on one side of them, so the side that you'll see up with is going to be what I'm going to correlate on the screen. For my Swashplates, I like to use Loctite 271 for the balls. I just find that it's a little bit more secure when I'm using red Loctite. Of course, if you can remove this with like massive amounts of heat, but you know, in most cases you can actually just replace the Swashplate if you have to. Now I'm going to go ahead and start off. All the balls are the same. There is a ball for the Swashplate that is for the guide. This one needs to go on to the back of the Swashplate. Now, the Swashplate itself is actually the same, and on every part, or I guess every wide side of the Swashplate, it says a different thing. Now, I like for the OMPHOBBY to face towards the front, so I'm going to go ahead and put this ball over here, the long one with the guide screw, or the guide pin on the back. Alright, so I've gone ahead and I've used red Loctite on all of the balls, and now we have the Swashplate together. The long screw is going to go on one of the edges, and this is actually going to be the orientation of the Swashplate when it's installed in the helicopter if the back of the helicopter is on the right. And so that says OMPHOBBY in the front, but like I said, it shouldn't really matter. You can honestly do it with it, or you can do it with any of these. So I recommend you don't open these bags until you pull them out as you need them. You'll note that there are three long linkage rods, and then two shorter ones. The shorter ones are actually for this connecting the swash plate to the blade grip arms, and then the long ones are for your servos to the swash plate on the outer ring. And once again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show that there is a difference here. Now, on the screen, I'm going to show the translation so that we know which side is for what side of the arm. If we inspect the linkage arms here, we can see that one side has up and up etched into it. Now, the side that says up, the ball links are going to use this symbol right here. And so I'm going to go ahead and grab this. When you thread it on, it's actually reverse thread on the side that says up. So just keep that in mind. You're going to turn it, it's reverse thread. And then you can grab one from the other bag, and then you can start to thread that on, and that will be a conventional thread, or like right-hand threaded. Now the manual states that the longer arms, the longer linkage arms are going to be 88.4 millimeters from end to end. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make that happen now. For your shorter link arms, you're going to want to make sure that the OMP Hobby logo is facing the same way. The reason is because when the head is on top of the swash plate, the arms are going to have the balls click on this way, which means that they need to, the ball links need to be in the same orientation. You'll also want to make sure that you, depending on which blade grip arms you choose, in my case I'm using the 32 millimeter ones, you want to make sure that you actually set these shorter ones to the correct length. So in my case, I need 71 millimeters from the end of the ball link to the end of the ball link, like this. And you know, it's within reason. I'm gonna have to set blade tracking anyway when I go through setup, so get it close enough, and that should be good. And once you get your first arm set up, you can actually kind of like tell where you're gonna want to set your links on the other side, so it makes it a little bit faster to assemble. You want to make sure that you have a more or less an equal amount of thread showing on each of the turnbuckle as well, because these are turnbuckles, so when you go to twist them, they're going to compress or actually they're going to squeeze, they're going to pull your ball links together or ball link ends together, or they're going to push them apart, and that's the nice thing about turnbuckles. Our turnbuckles are now assembled. We have our swash plate with all the balls installed and torqued down with red Loctite. We're done with page 3. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start off here with page 4. This is where we're going to start assembling our main bearing block for the main shaft, as well as parts of the upper frame. So we'll go ahead and just take our bearings here. Now I like to use green Loctite 638, so I'm going to go ahead and put green Loctite on this, place them into this I guess the main shaft support, and then those will actually go into these two blocks here. Then we'll actually screw this block onto our carbon plate. So now we have the bearings for the main shaft glued into this main shaft coaxiality block. What we can do now is clean it up a little bit and go ahead and start to bolt it into our frame, the other two supporting pieces of aluminum. Okay, so now that we have our main block assembly complete, you want to make sure that these nylocks are in here before you actually made it to the carbon plate. And you'll see that the carbon plate actually has countersinks in it for the countersunk screws here. So we'll go ahead and make sure that those nylocks are there. We can place our plate on top, and then we'll go ahead and mate these two together. Now that these nylocks are captivated within the assembly we have, we need to grab our brace here, and actually we'll go ahead and use the last two countersunk screws to hold this brace on. One thing that I do kind of recommend you do, it's not stated in the manual, but it makes it easier for wire management down the line, is actually to go ahead and pre-thread the zip ties that you're going to use through here. Now I use these super long zip ties, and I'm going to go ahead and pre-thread them now, but I find that it makes things much easier where you don't have to get access to the backside. Now, you actually can get access to the backside of these holes to thread zip ties through relatively easily. I've done it. It's not the end of the world if you don't do this now, but just for my sanity, I'm going to go ahead and thread these zip ties through now. Now that we have our zip ties through, we need to go ahead and actually look at these two lower servo mounts, because they are mirrors of each other, but they also do have an orientation. In this case, for the helicopter, if it's facing forward, this is going to be your left and this is going to be your right. And when I go ahead and I'll mount it up to the frame here, and I'll show you how they're supposed to sit. So take our right side frame, we'll put it up to the helicopter, and we'll see. Now, because we need to go ahead and put the right side lower brace on, we need to hold that there, and then this goes there, and then our M3 by 10 will go through here. One thing that you can do at this point as well, I'm going to go ahead and install these dry, because I'm going to have to remove this this bracket to thread the wires for my ESC through this gap right here. I'm not going to go ahead and do that now, but if you want to go ahead and if you want to go ahead and run your ESC wires now, you can do that. I just find it a little bit easier to go ahead and just unmount that. Now, your upper servo mount is going to mirror your lower servo mount from where it sticks out. So we'll go ahead and just place that there. And these ones I will Loctite, because I'm not going to be removing these again. All right, and then we'll go ahead and do the same thing for the other side. Now, notably, I am going to Loctite the screws for my brace, because I run my ESC wires up the right side of my helicopter. So I don't need to remove this brace or this lower servo mount. All right, so that is it. That is our upper frame assembly with our main shaft support in place here. We've gone ahead and glued the bearings in. We've attached the corresponding screws. We made sure that our nylocks are oriented in the correct way, because what happens is the motor mount actually comes into here, and you thread in the motor mount's two screws into these nylocks, and that's what kind of helps you keep the orientation. Let's move on to the ESC plate and the tail boom clamps, as well as the flybarless plate. This is going to be bag number 5 and the contents within it. You'll note that the tail boom clamps are a little different from each other, and this groove or this notch here on the front is actually going to go be on the front tail boom clamp. And so You'll want to make sure that you get these oriented right, otherwise you'll probably run into issues later on. The other big thing is the flybarless plate actually mounts to the tail boom clamps up here, so these need to be facing upwards. When installed in the helicopter, it'll actually be like this, where the let's say that the helicopter's front is pointing to the left here, we'll actually have this groove also on the left side of the helicopter, and this smooth one will have the palm insert over here in it, and it'll be kind of mounted like such. And I'll show you that when I go ahead and put it and install it into the frame. So what I'm going to go ahead and start off with, though, is going to be the ESC plate. So we have these 3 cross braces made out of aluminum, and we'll want to go ahead and actually use the countersunk screws that we have here to attach this plate to these braces. We'll go ahead and add a little bit of Loctite to that screw, feed that through, and go ahead and get that started. Grab another screw. And what's nice about these screws being countersunk is that they're flush on the ESC plate, as well as they actually help to locate these braces. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other 2 braces now. All right, so this is our ESC plate. I've got the 3 aluminum mounting brackets and braces here, as well as all 6 of the countersunk screws in. From here, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the flight controller mounting plate. You actually have the option to run this inertial damper. It's basically a machined piece of steel. The idea is this damper is supposed to help reduce vibration. In the manual, it'll actually tell you, the specific gyro sensor that actually requires this inertial damper. I've run it in all of my helicopters and actually had good success, so I'm going to keep it on this build as well. So I'm going to go ahead and use the 4 countersunk screws to get these installed. Okay, so I went ahead and installed the mass damper to my flight controller mounting plate. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the vibration grommets as well as the bushings that go into them. Now you'll note on these grommets that they are actually different on each side. So there's a countersunk side of the grommet, and that side's actually going to face upwards here. So with the plate looking like this, you're going to want that countersunk side of the grommet to actually be pointing upwards. I'm going to go ahead and get these grommets installed now. With all 4 of these rubber dampers installed, we can actually go ahead and take our bushings and put them through like this. Okay, so now that I have the bushings and rubber dampers mounted to my flight controller mounting plate, I can go ahead and mount them to my tail boom clamps. And we'll use the longer countersunk screws here. This is our completed tail boom and flight controller mount, or tail boom clamps mounted to the flight controller mount. Now, you really want to make sure that you get the slot here and this protrusion on the right side of or the correct side of the helicopter. And the reason is because it's going to, when you go to tighten down your tail boom, you're going to tighten the 2 screws on the right side of the helicopter for clamping your tail boom, and then the tail boom actually itself indexes into this this protrusion. So this is going to be how you're going to want to do it. The front of the helicopter will face to the left here. Now once you've done that, you can actually take your palm insert, go ahead and just slide it into here for now, and we'll go ahead and grab our main frame or upper frames and get this installed. So once again, you want to make sure that this protrusion, or the tail boom clamp with the protrusions on the front of the helicopter, and then that'll actually slot into these upper frames back here like this. Now, you will not put any screws into the bottom holes here because you're actually going to use longer screws to hold the lowers to the uppers using these bottom two. However, the top two screws you will want to go ahead and secure into place. And I'm going to use Loctite for those. I'm using the longer of the screws here. So I've got the 4 screws put into the tail boom clamps up here, and now we have a flight controller mount with the inertial damper in place. Next, I'm going to go ahead and mount my ESC plate. Now, if you're going to go ahead and you can actually probably run and mount your ESC now. In my case, I don't have an ESC that I've chosen for this model yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and get my plate mounted in, but that is something I would recommend. In my case, because I don't have an ESC on, and I do expect to have to pull this plate off again, I'm not going to put Loctite on these screws, but you should put Loctite onto these screws if you are mounting your ESC. Alright, so now we have the ESC plate mounted up, as well as the flight controller plate mounted to the tail boom clamps, and everything's secure. Our upper frame is starting to come together. Alright, so we're going to move on to the belt tensioner. Now, you'll note when you unpack that bag for the belt tensioner that there's going to be a second bag, and that's going to have your canopy mounting, the sacrificial canopy mounts. Now, in my case, because I want to kind of record this, I'm not going to mess with this bag just yet. I'll come back to this once I'm done assembling this entire idler, just to keep things a little bit less confusing. Now, of course, you know, it's going to have your bearings, it's going to have your bushings and so forth, and it's really important that you pay attention to the manual on the order of how this stuff is going to go together. I can do my best to try to show it, but, you know, of course, the manual is going to be your source of truth on this. As I like to use Loctite 638 or green Loctite on all of my bearings, I'm going to be going and gluing these bearings in. Now, it's kind of important to note how this entire assembly goes together. So the long countersunk screw here is actually going to go into this little piece, and once that goes through, you'll have a bearing. It's really important to get the orientation of this tensioner correct. So when you're looking at the assembly, you're going to want to make sure that the arm here is going to be sticking out to the left, and your screws here, which retain or provide that support, are going to be there. And you'll see that this arm actually has a little sort of protrusion here, and that's actually going to hit, or it's going to make contact with this piece in the event that you need to bottom your tensioner needs to come out. This is with both of the bearings and that smaller bushing pressed in. Of course, everything glued in with the green Loctite. Then I'm going to do the same thing here using a bolt to try to guide the bushings through when I go ahead and glue these bearings in. Alrighty, so we have both of the pulleys glued, as well as our little idler arm. We can go ahead and start assembling everything together now. So the long countersunk screw is going to go through this piece. You want to make sure you get your orientation correct, because otherwise things will not work the way they're supposed to. And the countersunk screw is going to go through this aluminum piece through our idler arm, and then it's actually going to thread into this mount, and it'll thread in like this. Go ahead and orient our piece and start getting it started. Now, before I tighten that, I'm actually going to try to put our the two smaller screws into our mount now. Alright, so now we can mount our pulleys to our belt tensioner assembly. You'll note that there is this cone looking spacer, and that cone spacer is actually there. If you look, it's to offset the pulleys so that they're at the same height. You'll use the longer of the two screws for the one that uses has the cone spacer. Stick that through. Make sure that you align your bushing on the inside there. Go ahead and put thread locker on this. The cone is going to have the narrow side of it face towards the bearing. Then that goes into the assembly here. And that is a completed belt tensioner assembly. We can see that the two pulleys are at the same height, and that one of them is able to pivot. And this is the one that's going to have the belt tensioner attached to it, or the belt tensioner putting pressure on it so that the belt has an adequate amount of tension. Next, we'll move on to the sacrificial canopy mounts. Canopy mounting system on this helicopter is quite unique. It's actually designed to be sacrificial. So in the event of an impact, these carbon plates should actually either pop out of the grooves in the frame, and you'll see it on the uppers when we go to assemble this, or they'll actually just completely break off, and that'll actually hopefully save your canopy. The shorter of the M3 screws is actually going to be what goes through this assembly here, and is going to go into the canopy mounting post, and then the longer of the two is going to go into this cross brace that we'll use when we go to install the sacrificial canopy mounting post into the frame. And then we can actually take our canopy bulb at this point, go ahead and put it through here. Now you can grab a second 2mm driver, and we'll go ahead and torque this down. That's one done, and we'll do the same thing for the other one. Now that we have our sacrificial canopy mounts done, we can actually go ahead and mount them into the frame, the upper frame. So if you look here, there's a larger hole as well as a smaller hole. The smaller hole is what's gonna actually mount this sacrificial canopy mount onto the frame, and there's that cross brace that goes across. So this cross brace goes on the inside of the frame here, and you can actually kind of line it up now. We'll place that there, take our M3 screw, go ahead and put some Loctite on it, start to tighten that. Now of course this is going to spin, so I'm not going to go ahead and try to torque that just yet. We'll do the same thing with the other side. Now I like to use two of the 2mm drivers and torque it down evenly. Perfect. Now we have our sacrificial canopy mounts mounted to our upper frames. All right. So now we can go ahead and mount our belt tensioner into the frame, and we're going to go and use the contents out of bag 7, corresponds to manual page 7. And you'll note that this star is actually quite tight initially. It'll actually loosen up over time as you use it. And the other thing is we have this screw, and what's going to actually happen is this carbon plate has this protrusion here, and that is going to slot or index with the slot here within this stud. So we can go ahead and just start to thread this into our star piece. Do note that this is reverse thread, so you'll need to keep that in mind as you go to thread it in. Take our upper frames, put them on their side or upside down. This pivoting side is actually going to be on the right side of the uppers. So if you look at the uppers, this is the right side, and that's going to be where this is sticking. And we can go ahead and start slotting in our belt tensioner. All right. And once that's into place, we can actually grab the small button head screws, and if you look at our assembly here, our tensioner assembly, the button head screws are button heads so that they clear the knob a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and try to stick these through while twisting the knob just a little bit to get some clearance. That's the first one. Use my driver. There we go. That's that first one. And then we can do the same thing for the other side. Now that I have those two in, I'm going to put some Loctite on these screws and go ahead and get them started into the belt tensioner assembly. And you'll want to evenly tighten these because otherwise your screws are going to stick out and potentially cause problems. Alright, and so now that tensioner is installed, you can see that we have a lot less play with that. And for the purposes of ease of install of belt later on, we can actually go ahead and unscrew this tensioner assembly all the way out until it stops, like that. And you can see how much play we have, or how much we have now. We'll use the 3 smaller socket head cap screws and install them from the left side of the frame. And they'll mirror what we did for the 2 for the actual tensioner knob, but then the third one's going to go on the back here. And then the larger socketed cap screws that use the 2.5mm driver are going to go up top here. One on each side. And there we have it. Our belt tensioner is now installed into the frame, and we have our tensioning knob as well.